12-year-old Jordan buzzed with anticipation for his very first-class journey until the crew's icy demeanor hinted that he didn't belong. His heart pounded like a drum as he clutched his boarding pass, each beat affirming the gravity of this moment. This was no ordinary trip, it marked his inaugural international flight. A devoted aviation dreamer, he had spent weeks poring over travel videos, memorizing flight paths and painting vivid daydreams of soaring above billowing clouds. And today, his fantasy was about to take flight. Walking beside him, his mother Camille adjusted the strap of her handbag as they navigated the bustling corridors of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. She glanced at her son with an amused smile, watching his eyes flit eagerly between towering departure boards, and teasing, "You'll tire yourself out before we even board," while giving him a playful nudge. Jordan barely registered her light-hearted ribbing. His gaze was fixed on the gleaming Boeing 787 Dreamliner parked at the gate, a colossal marvel in person that left him whispering in awe as he peered out the window. While other passengers queued in their designated boarding groups, Jordan's ticket told a different story. For the very first time, he was not relegated to economy. His father had secured luxurious first-class seats for both him and his mother as a cherished surprise. Murmuring under his breath with barely contained delight, he whispered, "This is going to be amazing." They strode toward the priority boarding lane, and the thrill of bypassing the endless queues made him feel as significant as a seasoned executive in a tailored suit. At the entrance, a flight attendant in a crisp uniform scanned tickets and offered each traveler a practiced, polished smile. When his turn arrived, Jordan practically leapt with excitement as he handed over his pass, as if unwrapping a coveted Christmas gift. The scanner chimed a cheerful beep, and the attendant cast a quick glance first at the ticket then at Jordan before saying, "Welcome aboard," returning it as though it were a golden key to an enchanted realm. Yet, just as he stepped onto the aircraft, that incandescent joy wavered like a fragile light on the brink of dimming. An ominous shift was imminent. Inside, Jordan's breath hitched as his eyes feasted on the sumptuous cabin, oversized, plush seats arrayed in a sleek, expansive layout. This first-class sanctuary, with its wide leather recliners, personal screens, and flight attendants gliding with serene efficiency, exuded the aroma of fresh linen and zesty citrus, a far cry from the cramped economy he'd known. A quick glance at his ticket confirmed his assigned spot, seat 4A, nestled perfectly by the window. As he neared his seat, a clear voice sliced through the ambient hum. "Excuse me, young man," said a woman in a crisp navy blue uniform as she stepped directly into his path. Startled, Jordan looked up and saw her familiar polished smile, the same as at the gate, but now her eyes betrayed a tension that knotted his stomach. She stated curtly, "This section is for first-class passengers only." For a fleeting moment, Jordan wondered if it were a jest, perhaps a mix-up, mistaking him for a lost child from economy. With a tentative yet confident smile, he raised his ticket and asserted, "I belong in first class." Her eyes flicked from the ticket back to him, and her smile faltered as she demanded, "Where did you get this ticket?" A question that stung unexpectedly. Blinking in surprise, he answered slowly, "My dad arranged it, it's my seat." The woman's lips pressed into a thin line, and rather than step aside, she pivoted toward the galley, murmuring softly as she summoned another crew member. Nearby, curious passengers began to take notice. A businessman pausing to adjust his tie glanced up from his laptop, while a woman cradling a champagne flute subtly lowered it. Feeling the oppressive weight of their stares, Jordan's grip on the boarding pass tightened, especially since his mother was momentarily absent, having slipped away to the restroom. He swallowed hard, longing for her reassuring presence. Soon, an older attendant, a man with silver threading his temples, approached and retrieved the ticket from the previous woman. He scanned it with an inscrutable face as he said, "Let me verify this with the front desk, please remain here." Uncomfortably, Jordan shifted as the first attendant continued to bar his way while passengers bustled around him, treating him like an unexpected impediment. The tie-adjusting businessman stole another glance, his brows knitting in quiet disapproval, as a woman clutching a designer handbag murmured to her husband. Jordan felt his ears heat with embarrassment, unsure whether it was the barrage of questions or the scrutinizing, speculative stares that unsettled him most. The worst part was the bewildering realization, he had done nothing wrong. Clammy palms gripped the boarding pass as if squeezing it could somehow affirm its legitimacy. Still, the attendant remained unmoving, and the other crew member disappeared to check his ticket further. Jordan knew the ticket was valid, it had always been his seat, but the scrutinizing looks made him feel like an intruder in his own privilege. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man in a charcoal suit adjusted his gold watch, his gaze lingering on Jordan with an expression that spoke not of curiosity but of unmistakable doubt. A few rows ahead, a woman in a cream blazer sighed softly before turning away, shaking her head. Jordan swallowed hard, his throat parched, when suddenly his mother's voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" Camille's heels clicked sharply along the carpeted aisle as she approached, her eyes darting from the stern attendant to her anxious son. She knew at once that something was terribly amiss. Jordan exhaled, a surge of relief almost overwhelming him, as the attendant turned to Camille with a strained smile. "Ma'am, we're merely verifying your son's seat assignment. There appears to be a mix-up." Camille's face remained composed as she echoed, "A mix-up?" Turning to Jordan, who wordlessly offered her his ticket, she asserted in a calm yet resolute tone, "This is no mistake. My son is assigned seat 4A. At that moment, the older attendant reappeared, ticket still in hand, and admitted hesitantly, "We couldn't find any issue with the booking." A slight easing stirred in Jordan's chest as he thought, "See? It's all fine." Yet the first attendant's skepticism lingered as she alternated her gaze between Camille and Jordan before murmuring, "Perhaps the system misfired. Was this an upgrade that went unprocessed?" Camille's lips parted in astonishment, her brows arching in disbelief as she repeated, "An upgrade?" A sinking sensation gripped Jordan as the questioning persisted. He was still under scrutiny. His mother inhaled sharply before adding in a measured tone, "If there were an issue, why wasn't it flagged at the gate? His ticket was scanned just like every other passenger's." The attendant hesitated, and the cabin filled with a subtle hum of murmurs as Jordan sensed the heavy weight of prying eyes and unspoken assumptions. Turning to her son, Camille urged softly, "Sit down, baby," though her voice carried an unmistakable edge. Jordan sank into his seat, and for a brief moment it appeared the ordeal might be ending as the attendants exchanged glances and, at last, the woman reluctantly stepped aside. He exhaled shakily, only to have the businessman across the aisle shift and remark lightly, "Perhaps it's just a misunderstanding. You know, they must be extra cautious with security these days," as he cast a sidelong look at Camille. Jordan's stomach churned as his mother fixed her gaze on the man. She held his stare for a lingering moment before a cool, unamused smile emerged as she replied, "Oh, I see. What exactly are they protecting my son from?" The businessman opened his mouth, then abruptly closed it, turning his gaze away. Jordan exhaled, suddenly aware that he had been holding his breath, and sensed that the matter was far from resolved. Camille resumed her seat beside him, though the tension in her shoulders remained palpable as she methodically adjusted her handbag strap, her face an enigma. Jordan recognized that steely look. His mother was never one to incite a scene, yet when provoked, she was formidable. The attendant lingered in silent defiance for a moment longer before finally retreating toward the galley. Attempting to refocus, Jordan tried to settle into his seat, tracing the contours of the comfortable armrest, but the magic of the experience had dimmed. Sensing his unease, his mother rested a reassuring hand on his knee and softly inquired, "Are you all right?" Jordan nodded, though the sting of embarrassment still burned as he mumbled, "I don't understand. Why did they doubt my ticket's authenticity?" Camille exhaled slowly and said, "Sweetheart, some people jump to conclusions. It's unjust, but it happens." Frowning, Jordan realized he'd been too absorbed to grasp it all until now. As the curious attention waned, he began connecting the dots, the skeptical looks, the hesitations, the murmured whispers. He wondered, if a white boy my age were in this first-class seat, would they have doubted him? Before he could voice his question, movement at the front caught his eye. The first attendant had reappeared, now accompanied by a supervisor, a woman in her 40s clad in a navy blazer with a neatly pinned name tag, wielding a tablet and bearing a strained expression. Jordan's stomach tightened as Camille turned toward the approaching woman, who coolly inquired, "Is there a problem?" With a tight smile, the supervisor explained, "I just need to verify the ticket one more time." Jordan remained still while Camille unbuckled her seatbelt, retrieved the boarding pass from his grasp, and rose. Surprised, the supervisor stepped back as Camille handed over the ticket, declaring, "There's nothing to verify yet. If you must, go ahead," prompting the supervisor to scan the barcode on her tablet with a hesitant air. Jordan watched his hands curl into fists as the tablet flashed a single green confirmation. The woman then looked up and admitted, "There's no issue, everything is in order," after a brief clearing of her throat. Camille's gaze stayed fixed as she coolly remarked, "Of course it is," and then a long, heavy pause ensued while the supervisor shifted, clearly sensing the oppressive silence settling over the cabin. Abruptly, the supervisor shifted as the uneasy stillness blanketed the space. Jordan could sense it too, the businessman across the aisle feigning concentration on his laptop without actually typing, while a few passengers ahead subtly leaned in as though covertly eavesdropping. Finally, the supervisor exhaled, "We apologize for the inconvenience." Jordan expected his mother to dismiss the ordeal and settle back into her seat, but she didn't. Instead, she tilted her head and repeated, "An inconvenience," in a tone dripping with measured politeness. The supervisor straightened her posture and reiterated, "We simply needed to ensure that everything is in proper order." Camille nodded slowly as if weighing every word, then leaned in and lowered her voice just enough to ask, "But tell me, how often do you double-check first-class tickets for 12-year-old boys?" The supervisor's lips parted in surprise, and Jordan's pulse quickened as he noticed a dawning realization on her face. Without waiting for an answer, Camille snatched the ticket from the supervisor's hands, sat down, buckled her seatbelt, and dismissively stated, "We're done here." The supervisor hesitated momentarily, then offered a single nod before turning and striding away. Yet the tension lingered, and whispers resumed as Jordan felt countless eyes upon him. He swallowed and looked to his mother, who now appeared as calm as ever, casually adjusting her bracelet as if nothing unusual had transpired. Just as Jordan began to exhale in relief, a deep, familiar voice cut through the murmurs, "What seems to be the issue here?" He froze. His father had arrived, the voice slicing through the cabin like a brisk gust, prompting heads to turn and passengers to straighten in their seats as an unmistakable change swept over the atmosphere. Before Jordan could fully process the moment, he saw his father standing tall in the aisle, clad in a sharp navy suit with a pristine white shirt. Malcolm Hayes was a man whose presence could not be overlooked, a slight furrow of his brow, the deliberate adjustment of his cuff, and his calm yet commanding tone spoke volumes before he uttered a single word. In a measured tone, he repeated, "I asked, what exactly is the issue?" The supervisor, who had moments earlier dismissed Camille with a clipped apology, visibly tensed. Jordan's heart pounded as his father's silent intensity reminded him that no raised voice was needed, his very presence commanded respect. His father fixed her with a long, inscrutable look, a look that told Jordan everything without uttering a word. Malcolm's gaze shifted from Jordan to Camille as he assessed the situation with quiet scrutiny. Jordan noticed a flicker of irritation beneath his father's composed facade as Malcolm slowly reached into his jacket pocket, retrieved his phone, and tapped its screen a few times. The attendant and supervisor watched, their anxiety mounting, as he finally spoke smoothly, "I just finished speaking with the regional manager of this airline," sliding his phone back into his pocket, "and he will be very interested in how my son and wife were treated today." The supervisor blinked in surprise, stammering, "I." But Malcolm pressed on, "I believe she'll want to discuss this with someone higher up, corporate, perhaps." He let the words settle before adding almost as an afterthought, "Since I own the airline." The supervisor's breath caught, the flight attendant's face drained of color, and a few passengers gasped in unison. Jordan sat frozen, watching the dawning realization on the crew's faces, while the businessman across the aisle cleared his throat and suddenly appeared overly engrossed in his laptop. Camille smirked as she turned to Jordan and softly asked, "Are you all right now, baby?" Jordan exhaled and nodded slowly, while his father's unyielding gaze remained fixed on the supervisor. No yelling was needed, his words had already made their mark. The supervisor, her face taut with forced courtesy, attempted to recover. "Mr. Hayes, please understand, this was never about..." Malcolm raised a hand to cut her off, his tone smooth yet laced with steel, "Save it," causing her to clamp her mouth shut. Turning his attention to the first attendant, the very one who had ignited the entire debacle and now avoided his eyes, Malcolm let a heavy silence linger before tilting his head and stating, "We'll have a conversation about this after the flight." The supervisor visibly swallowed as passengers continued to stare, some shocked, some uncomfortable, others with quiet vindication. For the first time since boarding, Jordan allowed his shoulders to drop, yet one burning question still seared within him: why did it take all of this for them to believe me? The supervisor offered a stiff nod before turning on her heel and briskly marching back toward the galley, her posture rigid with tension. The attendant who had earlier questioned his ticket trailed behind, her usual polished smile replaced by a somber expression. For a fleeting moment, the entire first-class cabin felt frozen, with onlookers hastily feigning preoccupation with their screens, magazines, or drinks. The businessman across the aisle cast a furtive glance at Malcolm, then at Jordan, before rapidly returning to his laptop and typing as though nothing had occurred. Jordan could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears as his father exhaled through his nose and adjusted his cuff, a subtle gesture that spoke of lingering irritation. Camille, in contrast, seemed amused. She reclined in her seat with a playful air, crossing her legs as if she'd just triumphed in a secret game, ignoring the scurrying crew. Then, turning to Jordan, she gently ruffled his curls and asked, "Now, are you ready to enjoy your flight?" Jordan hesitated. Relief should have washed over him. His father had just quelled the entire debacle with a few potent words. After all, he wasn't just any passenger, he owned the airline. It all felt surreal, almost cinematic, yet something still felt off. Sensing his lingering unease, his father sighed quietly before taking the seat across the aisle and calmly urged, "Talk to me." After a pause, Jordan finally mustered the question, "Would this have happened if I looked different?" The question hung in the air, and rather than rush to answer, his father leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze reflective as he finally murmured, "You already know the answer." Jordan swallowed hard, he did know. Meanwhile, Camille exhaled and shook her head gently, muttering, "You were just a kid in a seat you paid for, and yet, somehow, that wasn't enough." Lowering his eyes to his hands, Jordan realized that despite possessing a first-class ticket and a father who owned the company, none of that shielded him. They saw only him, and that was enough for them to doubt his right to belong. He yearned to celebrate his father's decisive stand, yet he couldn't fathom why it had to come at such an emotional cost. His father reached over, resting a firm hand on his shoulder, and intoned, "Let me tell you something, son, power isn't measured by wealth or status, but by knowing who you are and never letting anyone make you doubt that." Meeting his father's unwavering gaze, Jordan felt a steady resolve bloom within him. Camille added softly, "They aim to make you feel small, baby, but look at you, you never shrank." The words sank deep, and for the first time since boarding, Jordan felt not fear but pride. The murmurs in the cabin gradually resumed, and though the crew still avoided his eyes, it no longer mattered. The lesson had been learned by all, perhaps not equally. Slumping back into his seat, Jordan began to relax, only to have his father smirk and remark casually, "And don't get too comfortable, because the next time I get you a first-class ticket, you'll owe me." Jordan's jaw dropped in silent astonishment, and his mother chuckled while the flight attendants strove to feign normalcy, even as the palpable tension lingered. The same skeptical eyes that had once scrutinized him now avoided his gaze, yet the day's lesson had resonated far beyond the cabin crew. He noticed passengers shifting uneasily, stealing glances when he wasn't watching, some embarrassed, others reconsidering their judgments, and still others too stubborn to admit they were wrong, like the businessman across the aisle whose silence after Malcolm's revelation spoke volumes. Jordan felt not anger but a touch of pity toward that man, while his father had already moved on, reaching into his seat's side compartment to pull out an actual newspaper. No tablet or phone could replace that, prompting a smirk from Jordan, "Classic Dad." Meanwhile, Camille had begun perusing the in-flight menu, exclaiming with delight, "Ooh, they've got warm chocolate chip cookies on this flight." Jordan's interest peaked as he asked, "Wait, really?" and his mother grinned, "First-class perks, baby." He exhaled deeply, attempting to shake off the heaviness of the ordeal. It still stung, as if it always would, while his father's earlier words echoed, "Power is knowing who you are and never letting anyone make you question that." And at that moment, hunger began to rumble. The earlier flight attendant hesitated before approaching their row again. Though her professional mask was firmly in place, her voice sounded a bit tighter as she inquired, "Would you like something to drink?" Camille shot Jordan a glance and asked softly, "What do you say, baby?" Noticing the subtle challenge in her tone, a choice to either shrink in embarrassment or to stand tall, Jordan smiled and, with steady resolve, said, "I'll have a Sprite," pausing briefly as the attendant nodded and turned toward the galley, her posture noticeably stiffer. Jordan felt himself relax further as Camille smirked and handed him the menu, adding playfully, "And what about those cookies? I think we should order a few extra." A chuckle from his father behind his newspaper echoed, "That's my boy." As the plane taxied down the runway, Jordan surveyed the first-class cabin one final time, the elegant leather seats, the gleaming surfaces, the passengers easing into comfort, and yet he felt transformed. He hadn't merely taken his first international flight. Today he learned a lesson that would endure, no matter where life led or how many doubted him. He belonged, and that truth could never be taken away. Life, after all, tests us in the most unforeseen moments. Jordan never anticipated being questioned over a seat that was rightfully his, nor did he expect to witness how swiftly people could judge without understanding. Yet, he also did not foresee emerging from that flight stronger than before, and perhaps that was the true lesson: stand your ground, cherish your worth, and never allow anyone to make you feel unworthy. If you found this story thought-provoking, eye-opening, or inspiring, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes a single tale can transform the way we see the world.